You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel. Hi, you're listening to episode 38 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Ash.
And I'm Dilley.
And this is the second part of our discussion with experimental archaeologists Emma Jones and Dr. James Dilley, chatting all about arrows.
Woo-hoo.
So, let's quickly remind ourselves where we were before Cupid sent us all those blasted enchanted Valentine's Day cards.
Oh, gosh.
So, Cupid is wreaking havoc on the kingdom, showering all our neighbours with love, sickly, sweet, nauseating love. And we're determined to stop him. Not because we hate love. No. But, you can only see so much of it before it starts to, sour. So, well, Cupid can be a bit of a tyrant this time of year, and so we've tasked ourselves with finding the Arrow of Ambivalence, which will restore the good citizens back to their rational selves. We've enlisted Emma Jones and Dr. James Dilley, experimental archaeologists, to help us find this arrow through archaeological means. So we've looked at the representation of arrows and love through the world of fantasy, but what if we look at the archaeological evidence? Can you tell us a little bit more, guys, about maybe arrows in the archaeological record?
So I guess through prehistory covers much of the world, and generally people used the materials that suited the task and were available to them, not necessarily always in the immediate area, but in some way would perhaps be accessible after a journey or to be tradable, I suppose. But generally, the first kinds of arrows or projectile tips are made of stone, and typically of a stone that can be flaked, like flint or obsidian, to produce a really, really sharp edge. But we get arrowheads made of osseous materials like bone or antler, or even metals like copper or bronze. We've even got some shell arrows from Norway. Yeah, they're unusual, but generally people appear to have used a whole variety of arrows. And I suppose in relation to Eros's blunt arrows or his anti-love arrows, there are wooden-tipped arrows from some of the Scandinavian late Mesolithic Urtibola sites that have sort of thicker front ends to them where a sharp arrowhead would be. It's just a thicker piece of wood, which are thought to be for knocking birds out the sky, but they are most definitely blunt.
Oh, interesting. Right. Or just a really mean game of tag.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah.
Or earliest, what was it called? Archaeo tag
Nerf
or something,
guns.
Right? Has anyone played the archery tag? It's great fun. And they basically have a big... It's basically, you have two teams. Sorry, slight digression. You have two teams on sort of either side of a pitch, and you can't cross the line. It's kind of like Dodgers in that respect, that you can't cross the line in the middle. Dodgeball, sorry, not Dodgers.
I was like, what?
Dodgers. And then but the arrows have big fuzzy things on the end, so they don't hurt when they hit you, but you basically are shooting each other.
Sorry, you're just hunting people now.
It's dodgeball, but with arrows. Okay. Yeah. So that's probably what they were doing in Scandinavia at this time as well.
Absolutely.
Only a one-round game.
Yeah. High stakes.
That's the best type of sport.
It's like the prehistoric version of Squid Games.
Oh my God, yeah.
What, Squid Games?
Oh, Tilly!
Well, I feel like it's
Keep
one
in
of
mind
the
I've
first...
spent most of my childhood outside of the UK.
Yes, Tilly, this was on Netflix about 2 years ago.
Oh, really? Okay.
You don't have an excuse.
Nice try.
But I don't know if it's their first task, because essentially a group of people are collected for a game. At the end, if they survive, they win a pot of money. But each round or each game is essentially a game to the death, or proportion of the people are going to die. And it's essentially like a musical chairs, isn't it? They have to get from one side of a pitch to the other, and if somebody moves, they get shot. But you can
it's Grandma's
replace
Footsteps.
that with Grandma's Footsteps.
I assume this is like a fictional show, not a...
Yeah, no, they live
really
stream it.
I was just thinking, is this like I'm a celebrity, get me out of here style of thing? It's sort of...
They did float the idea of doing a live version of the show. And not
They do
obviously
it.
They did.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, but it was
I assume not to
so
the death.
abhorrent because people were not to the death, to like fictional death. I think we haven't seen the contestants.
I was about to say,
though,
is this the Hunger Games? Like in
I mean,
reality?
things are quite dystopian at the moment, but I don't know if they're that dystopian yet.
I don't know. This episode's going to be released in a couple of months from when we're recording, so who knows what will be happening.
It might not ever be released.
Maybe the world will have collapsed by that point.
Until you will truly know what Squid Games is.
There we go.
And James will be making lots of flint arrows.
Yes, we're coming to you, James.
Yeah, we're definitely coming to you. You're going to be our weaponsmith.
But indeed, going back to the materials, right? Honestly, this is the episodes that we're diverging the most from our original topic, which is great. I'm enjoying these discussions, but right, let's come back on track.
It's only because you don't know TV shows.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I know. True. Yeah, all of our diversions have been due to that. So, in terms of the material, you mentioned that the majority are from stone, but there are also some from other materials. Is that just because? Do you think that it would have mainly been from stone? Are there a lot of kind of practical advantages to stone as a material for an arrowhead? Or do you think that maybe there would have been more organic arrowheads in the past, we just don't find them?
Yeah, and you're right to identify that representation is important here, that stone is generally pretty indestructible in comparison to even hard organic materials. But I suppose on the other hand, well, I guess on sort of the same hand, but to broaden that side of things, that osseous material may well wear down quicker or become damaged quicker, because although flint, when it's thin, is quite fragile and brittle, having loosed many replica arrows into a variety of target mediums, from sort of very hard surfaces to ballistics gel and that sort of thing, flint arrows are really, really durable. It's usually the arrow shaft that will become damaged first. It's really impressive how durable they are. And we see that in the record when arrows have been found in bones, that they're still generally in one piece. Whereas testing osseous arrowheads, they generally break first. But if there's no access to sharp, workable stone, then that's what you've got to work with.
Fair enough, yeah. And in terms of where you kind of find these objects in the archaeological record, I mean, I'm just picturing archery, times when I was younger. We had bows and arrows at home and things, but also like for school, you have your fun sport day and you get to try archery sometimes and all these kinds of things. And they go everywhere, right? The arrows and the things just go all over the place. Do you just find them randomly lying in the ground? Do you kind of, is there always particular spots that you have to look for arrowheads in the archaeological record?
No, it can be pretty random. In fact, last weekend I was running a bronze casting workshop at Worthing Museum, and on the Sunday we usually end up going for a walk to a nearby site, and someone picked up a flint arrowhead just on the walk. So it does just happen. You will get a greater concentration at particular sites, but yeah, they can appear as people just lose arrows.
And you also get them deposited as grave goods, though, don't you? Along with, archers' wrist guards. But definitely, I guess, the nature of them means that they are going to be everywhere, potentially, if you're lucky enough to find one.
This doesn't bode well for our trying to find this Arrow of Ambivalence, because that means it could be anywhere.
But if we can't find one, like, how does one make an arrow?
Oh, you're going that route. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going that route.
You don't make an arrow. Okay, cool.
Okay, never mind then. Can't do it.
You're supposed to answer the questions that are relating to you. I don't make them. I find them. I guess part of what could tie into that conversation is that I was lucky enough to find an arrowhead in a field just by where I grew up, and this was one of the first times that James and I went field walking. So I'm there like completely ignorant, have no idea what lithics look like, just picking up a bit of flint here and there, going, is this something? And James is like, no, sorry, chucks it over his shoulder, carry on. And we must have been out for about an hour or so, and I probably was at the point where I was thinking, yeah, maybe we should go get like a nice cup of tea to warm up or something. Anyway, I reach down and I pick up this thing, and I mean, even though I didn't know what the hell I was looking for, I still had the feeling of maybe this is actually something rather than just a bit of, knobbly old flint. So I hold up this thing and go, is this something, to James? And he comes over and he's like, Yes. Yes, it is. You've just found a chisel arrowhead. I've only ever found 3 arrowheads as an archaeologist, and they were all on archaeological digs. And I was like,
I must just have the gift. Yeah.
So the lovely tie into that is that James then very sweetly made it into a silver arrowhead pendant and gave it to me for Valentine's Day for our first Valentine's. So
no, it's spreading out.
Oh God, I think we need to find this arrow immediately.
One of those letters. I don't know if I was supposed to do that. I just, so many came through the letterbox that I thought I should just open one.
Sniffing letters.
Stop sniffing the letters. They're enchanted. Oh, they're getting soppy. Okay.
Oh gosh.
But then, okay, so Emma's the finding the arrows.
And James is definitely the making.
Yeah, I feel that I'm very much cursed to make but shall never find.
It's just the way the world works, James.
So, James, how do you make an arrow?
Please, people, let's move this conversation onward. So how do you make an arrow? Well, I suppose this is where we can go into the ancient craft armory. And at some point, I need to develop a button that I can press to go to the ancient craft armory.
Ancient craft armory.
Yeah, exactly. You've selected arrows and projectiles, and now you have a selection of options. Would you like your arrowhead to be stone-tipped, blunt, wood, perhaps slate-tipped, or bone, antler, or you name it? They all have their own stats, I suppose. But flint is sharp and is pretty durable. The downside is they're expensive to make because flint doesn't occur everywhere, and you need a specialist to actually make a good arrowhead. But fortunately, you've got me on hand, and I've got plenty of flint, so we can go for flint. And I would need to take a flake of flint from when I'm making something like an axe head and pressure flake the edges using a piece of antler or a copper tipped tool for an early Bronze Age arrowhead to quite literally push off the flakes rather than hitting the flakes off, using bodily pressure to detach them, which takes years of practice and is really hard work, but can be done. yeah.
It's really hard work. I can confirm that part. If you want to see the videos of James doing this, there is a fantastic YouTube channel called Ancient Craft where you can see, what was it called? Nap Time, right? That you guys did in...
That's it.
I loved it. And you can learn how to nap your very own arrowhead as well. But
what I find really... obviously, if you put any content out online, you're going to get comments back. And one of the things that always gives me a slight chuckle is the amount of comments James receives about the waste flakes he produces while he's making an object. But what people don't see behind the scenes are literally the buckets and buckets of flakes that have been collected that are all going to go to different uses, and many of those will then become other objects like arrows. So it's sort of this horror and uproar of people who don't necessarily have the access to flint that we do, that oh gosh, how could you smash up this big rock and then waste it all? No, that is not the case.
It's not sustainable flint napping.
Yeah, gosh.
It is not. No, I cannot easily recycle the waste. It is, I guess, out of even many of the things and processes and manufacturing styles that are done today, flint napping is the one that will leave waste that will be there in perpetuity.
Which we know as archaeologists, which is good.
Yes, exactly.
Good, yeah.
However, if you take it back to the quarry and they crush it up for aggregate, that helps reduce your impact.
Okay. There you go. Those listeners, you can do it. Sustainable, modern world, arrow flint napping.
Eco-friendly.
Yes, eco-friendly flint napping. There we go.
And it's good for your mental health. There you go.
Yeah.
Ticks all the boxes.
Is it?
It depends on if the flint's behaving.
And you mentioned already that and I love that idea, by the way, you definitely have to make that into some sort of game where you go in and you're like, pick which arrow you need. What do you need it for? And you mentioned that there's so many different typologies and everything. So do you use a different technique depending on the end typology, or is the general method kind of the same?
Some of the method is similar, but for very early arrowheads, they were often made from long laminar blades taken from a blade core that would be trimmed just using two stones, like a little hammer and anvil. Aww. And then later they actually used, yes, and they're even called petit tranchées for
that's just
the little slice, which sounds cute, and they're very small, but they are intended to go flying past and sever arteries as they go past.
Okay.
Oh, nice.
So
that's what we need.
Deadly.
Yes, yeah, indeed. But for later arrowheads, they were pressure flaked, as I said, and they're invasively flaked across the surface. But whether it be for very early leaf-shaped arrowheads or the, I guess, more iconic triangular barbed and tanged arrowheads, the process is much about the same. But interestingly, what you don't get is the same type of arrowhead that occurs at the same time. So you can't say, oh, well, that arrowhead was probably used for hunting this animal, or this arrowhead was used for loosing at people. You see transition from leaf-shaped arrowheads to chisel arrowheads to oblique arrowheads, and then eventually barbed and tanged arrowheads, which suggests that these arrowheads were used for a variety of purposes, including hunting game, hunting people, I suppose, or possibly even as status symbols. Just the fashion changes or the style changes rather than having lots of quite specific purposes. So I guess that doesn't really fit into the armory particularly well, but we'll ignore that just because I can.
This is a fantasy podcast. You can ignore those sort of things.
And I guess for anyone who hasn't spent as much time looking at arrows as James might have done, leaf arrowhead is a leaf shape, so that's fairly easy to picture. But when you get into the petit tranché and the chisel arrowheads, we naturally think of arrows as being pointy and triangular and hafted with the point facing towards the thing you want to hit. But for petit and chisel arrowheads, they're actually hafted what we would say like the wrong way round. And there are ethnographic examples of sort of these backwards arrowheads that I think, James, they use for hunting birds. Is that right? So
that's one suggestion.
It's a possible suggestion that there could be a prey choice, but equally, we've got a video of James firing a chisel arrowhead into some ballistics gel at the ATC a few years back, and they produce a massive wound channel, which you can imagine if you wanted to take down a large animal quickly, that's going to get embedded into it and leave a big gap where lots of blood can come out. And I'm horribly squeamish, so I'm going to leave it there. But yeah, starting possibly to see those preferences for more effective weapons. And then I guess a tanged arrow would also serve the same purpose, James, to sort of stop it from coming back out as easily and getting lost or broken or...
Yeah, and we don't know exactly how these arrowheads are supposed, because often we just find lots and lots of the arrowheads, and very rarely are they found, I suppose, still in the prey. We have to look at how, I guess, going back to that experimental archaeology, making some replicas and testing them as we did on the ballistics gel. And a very good friend of mine that I did my PhD alongside, Mike Burgess at Southampton, spent a lot of time looking at these chisel arrowheads. And some of them are so wide and have these massive hooks on the side of them that I guess the penetration of them, because they're not pointy, they're wide at the front, they're just so different, and they fly really weirdly as well because of their shape. They're not anywhere near as aerodynamically balanced as other arrows, but as has been pointed out, they may be either for just very short shooting or just perhaps for defense, where you don't need such long-range arrows, or just for a fear factor that people are making these oversized arrowheads so that I guess you look at that and think, yeah, I wouldn't like to get hit by that, maybe. But I think they're misunderstood. But I suppose, interestingly, in the early Neolithic, when we see these really finely made arrowheads right through to the early Bronze Age, the frequency of wild hunted animals drops dramatically. So actually these arrowheads are not being used for intense hunting like they were prior to the Neolithic in the Mesolithic, when they were making these quite, not basic, but very efficient, quickly made arrowheads that were very effective.
Tilly, what are you eating?
An apple. Oh, it's so delicious. And it's almost golden. Where did you get them from?
Right, put that down. Stop eating it now.
Relax, Ash. It's just a little apple. What harm can it do?
You better hope no wars break out after eating that. Okay, guys, we'll be right back. Okay, I've stashed the apples away. Another loving gift from Cupid, I assume.
Oh, yeah, but it was so delicious. Anyway, sorry, guys, we cut you off in the middle of a very interesting discussion about the different kinds of arrowheads that have been found archaeologically and what they've been used for. So, yes, sorry, you were saying.
Well, I guess I was just trying to think of examples of arrows that have been found and used in anger. And James, am I right in thinking that we do have examples of this?
Yes, we definitely do, both from cattle skulls from the Neolithic and Bronze Age, or I guess more to open it more widely, more bovid skulls, because they include auroch as well as domestic cattle, but also people that have been knocked over with arrows. There is famously, and you can see them on display in Salisbury Museum, a individual that was found in the Stonehenge landscape with a arrowhead still in place in their sternum, which would have hurt, I guess, would have probably knocked them over permanently. But even from more recently well-known sites like the Talentz battlefield in northern Germany, that's from the Middle Bronze Age.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, that's the one. There are plenty of both flint and bronze arrowheads that were found, and recent research has looked into the bronze arrowheads in particular, which are generally, from a typology and style point of view, associated with southern Germany. So they've postulated that either a large amount of arrowheads have been moved ready for this battle, or people from southern Germany are perhaps moving into northern Germany, or what would be Germany, and were perhaps one side of this battle, as all the arrowheads were found concentrated in one area. So we see plenty of them that were clearly used effectively.
And I think that's a nice tie-in to Bernard Cornwell's Stonehenge book, because even though it's a fictitious book, it's thoroughly based on the archaeological record. And what I enjoyed as, having an understanding of some, but not necessarily all of the archaeology that have been found in the Stonehenge landscape, is the amount of details and little details here and there that he's managed to weave and tie into his narrative, and definitely the examples of people being shot with arrows and that being in the archaeological record and tying into that his story. Yeah, it's one of his kind of clever tie-ins, I guess.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about already how it's quite difficult to necessarily find random arrows, especially because there might not even be a specific arrow. With Cupid's arrow, there's so many different ones, so many possibilities where it can be. So as Ash kind of alluded to in the last section, maybe it would be better to actually make our own arrow. So if we consider kind of what we need, so this arrow of ambivalence, if we consider its purpose is to, I don't know, what would you say its purpose is, Ash? Like, what would be the aim of the arrow?
We need to get people... I see what you did there, Tilly. Very clever, very clever. I think what we need to do is just get people back to their logical selves. Okay. We just want people to go back to normal, somewhere in between the love arrow and the blunt kind of aversion arrow. We need people to just be normal again.
Okay, and the love arrow is gold and the blunt arrow is lead.
Lead.
Okay, So to our experts, if you would need to create an arrow that would be somewhere material-wise between gold and lead, which pick your interpretation of that as you will, and would need to the aim would be to insert people with a feeling of ambivalence and normality. What kind of arrow, what kind of approach would you use?
I mean, I'm tempted to go with flint here, because it is, it'd be perhaps flint or bronze, which I guess archaeologically are well represented. well, maybe, but
I'm sorry.
I was trying to think about.
I immediately went to silver, but I feel like that's taken because of the whole vampire thing.
Vampire.
So I think that's got to be ruled out. I was
thinking that in between.
Yeah, we do have citizens that are vampires, so we don't want to actually kill them.
Yeah, that could be problematic.
Yeah.
No, it does need to be something in between that isn't as soft or as heavy as lead. And I suppose it's got to be something that takes away that completely over the top blind happiness and positivity that one of those love arrows can bring in. So it's something that causes a bit of a thump, but doesn't necessarily take someone off their feet. So yeah, flint, bronze. That if you get hit by one of them, that's certainly going to bring a bit of negativity into your life.
They're both quite stabby, though. I think you would cause a lot of damage with those. I know arrows are supposed to, kill people, but I feel like these ones need to be friendly arrows to the point of giving. If you're going to shoot someone with an arrow and not harm them and maim them seriously, can I be biased and say maybe we could make it out of jet? Because not only would it be really like snazzy, shiny black, but it's also quite a soft material and it's brittle. So the chances of it breaking or giving you possibly a softer impact, I don't know if that would be actually the case. Maybe we'll have to try that on the ballistics gel next, James.
Yeah, I think if you still took a jet arrow in the knee, it's going to ruin your day.
I assume that the golden arrow is also pointed, so it must be enchanted in some way that it doesn't actually kill. So we'll just have to we'll look through the archives and we'll find the enchantment and we'll be able to apply that to whatever arrow we create.
Maybe it's like the black arrow, it just sinks into you.
Yeah. It just fizzles away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, becomes one with you. Yeah, okay. So we have some potential materials. So how about the typology? Like what style of arrow would you think, based on your knowledge of different arrow types?
Ooh, I think it's got to be the barbed and tanged arrowhead because we want these things to stick and not come out.
Iconic. Yeah, we don't want this mess again. Even if the apples are tasty.
Okay, so and those arrows that then random side note, when you're attaching an arrow, a flint arrow to a shaft, how does that, like what impact does the shaft have on the use of the arrow? Will that also be something we need to consider?
Yeah, do we need resin?
No.
Yeah, we'll definitely need some kind of glue, but I suppose like choosing a wand to be made of the right wood species for to suit the character. I suppose we could look at the particular arrow shaft materials that could be used, because people use different materials through prehistory, either based on availability or preference. And definitely the very earliest arrows in Europe were made of pine, which is definitely not a traditional material in the modern world, but clearly it is one of the oldest, so it's pretty traditional. But that's almost certainly down to availability rather than choice, because it was just before the end of the last glacial maximum, whereas later people generally moved over to viburnum, like dogwood, because it grows pretty straight and it's flexible, but even once it's dried out, it's still quite flexible. Whereas into the Bronze Age, people generally moved over to using hazel, which may be down to availability, but interestingly, hazel starts to get more brittle over time. So usually with arrows that have been made from shoots rather than dowel, they have to be re-straightened every so often. Whereas with dowel arrow shafts, you don't have to usually, unless they get very damp or hot. So people would have to maintain them quite frequently. And I suppose that's something that, because it's such a subtle detail, we don't see so much or think about in the record, or even myths and legends about people having to maintain their arrows, or even just straightening the fletchings on them so that the feathers aren't all crinkled, or perhaps just checking them or cleaning them. It's just not something we think about. And I suppose for Cupid's or Eros's arrows, because they are enchanted, which clearly helps, but I wonder if maintaining his equipment would ever sort of feature, perhaps, but I think not.
I've just looked up some information about different wand types, because I really like that idea about the shaft featuring. And
love that you're doing background research during the recording. Best guest ever.
So I guess if we're going to be a stickler to fit with our archaeological theme, alder has quite a nice tie-in, because it's described as an unyielding wood, its ideal owner is not stubborn or obstinate, but often helpful, considerate, and most likable. And I think if you're going to, make an arrow for this task, you are trying to be quite helpful and considerate. And so should we go for an older shaft?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Brilliant. Hope you're taking
that's decided, folks.
Motion
carried, yes.
Get to work, James.
Right, okay.
Emma, you mentioned jet. So how would the creation of an arrowhead be different from that material to, say, flint, as we talked about before?
Yeah, so I guess, I wouldn't nap jet in the way that you would nap flint. Jet does actually produce a conchoidal fracture if you hit it. So one of the ways, I guess, you could test for jet, if it wasn't an archaeological artifact that you were examining, would be to hit it and see if it fractures conchoidally. And sometimes when you walk along a beach, in a whippy area, and you're picking up black things that all kind of look the same in the wash, in the water, everything's nice and shiny. You can accidentally mistake plastic, stone, coal for jet. Sometimes when you find bits of jet on the beach, they have been hit by other stones, so you can see little kind of conchoidal fractures or like tiny fragments that have been taken out of them. But if I was going to reliably work jet into a arrowhead, I'd probably have to carve and shape it. And one of the ways that this could have been done in prehistory is just simply on a sandstone block and time. So you could use flint blades for scraping and shaping. But yes, it's quite a tricky material to work with. As I said, it was soft, but it is also brittle. And like most natural materials, it can be prone to having flaws in it. So sometimes you'll be working on whether it's a piece of flint or jet. If it's not a good quality piece, you might have, some natural inclusions or flaws that could cause it to break halfway through. And you've just got to accept that and try again.
I feel like that's a perfect metaphor for life, for personhood. I mean, I felt a great affinity there where you said it's soft and brittle with some flaws. I was like, yep, that's I see that.
You see me.
But so it sounds like then what might be a good idea is to have a couple of different arrows, because how many arrows are we actually going to make here? Because you've been talking about how you have all these different kinds of arrows depending on what you want to use it for. I'm imagining people with like a quiver full of arrows, like almost like a golf bag, with like different golf clubs based on what you want to use it for. So how many arrows would you say we need for this particular task? Can we just do it with one arrow, or would we need to have a couple?
Or could we target Cupid?
The plot thickens.
I felt really powerful there.
I was also thinking, if we're going to have an enchantment, maybe the enchantment is a never depleting quiver.
True. Yeah, that would be
a quiver of plenty.
Hey!
So I guess for these arrows to be really effective on Eros, we need to in some way make him fall in love with someone who is going to ping this arrow at him, because Psyche dropped some lamp oil on Eros, and that although that wound generally wouldn't affect people for too long, that wound was particularly effective on a god or in a demigod, because it was someone that they loved far more so than just a human. So I guess we would need to be quite tactical about how to be as effective as possible.
So who's doing the firing is also important then. Yeah, in that respect. Good point.
Any volunteers?
Also, just because, can we throw in some like phoenix feather fletchings, because why not?
Ooh.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh God, I'm loving this arrow so far.
Yeah, right. We need to actually. Are we going to have to actually make this arrow now?
The most bougie
I feel
arrow
like this
ever.
is going to be expensive.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was like, how accessible is this arrow?
I mean, but it's for a very good cause, I would argue.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so I think we've got a bit of a solution then. We can make maybe a couple of different arrows, enchant the quiver so that it kind of constantly refills, have some arrows for general people, but also try and maybe target Eros / Cupid with a particular arrow, and then we need to think of who will fire it. So yeah, I think, does that sound like a good plan to everyone?
I like it.
Yeah. Okay.
What are we waiting for?
Then Emma and James, we look forward to receiving your completed arrowheads. Ash and I will start straightening the shafts.
Yes.
And we'll go and find that phoenix later as well.
Well, that's about it for this episode of And My Trowel. We hope you enjoyed this quest. Thank you so much, Emma and James, for helping us out with this particular problem. We're going to get that pesky Cupid, no doubt. It was great to have you guys join us. And I think we've definitely learned a lot about arrowheads.
Yeah, it was great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
And I mean, of course, keeping in mind, by the way, that we're recording this in 2024, but it will be released around Valentine's Day in 2025. Do you have any exciting projects coming up on the horizon? And also, if people want to follow you and find out more about what you do and your work and your projects, where can they do that?
Well, we do have some exciting projects coming up next year. We are not able to fully reveal a couple of them just yet, because they are in that early development phase, including perhaps some. I guess the one we can is expanding on the Bronze Age boat build at Stanwick Lakes in Northampton, moving on to bigger and better projects, hopefully. But the best place to keep an eye on what we're doing is to find us on social media for both of us, I guess, at Ancient Craft UK, or for Emma, Prehistoric Jewellery. But if you search for either one of us, you'll find what we're up to.
You'll find the other. Oh dear, I think we need to get those arrows done soon.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for coming along. And as always, we are always open for new episode ideas. So if this particular problem has sparked some inspiration for you, please do get in touch. Also, if there's any suggestions people have for an episode that they've gotten from a fantasy book, maybe you have an archaeological concept you don't quite understand that we can explain through fantasy, something in a book you want to think about from an archaeological viewpoint, anything at all, get in contact with us via email or social media. All of the contact info for us, plus for James and Emma, as well as references for further reading for all of the points we've discussed today, can be found in the show notes. Also, we have some very, very exciting news, because you might be thinking, why do they have two people coming on for this episode, this special Valentine's episode? And this actually is not the special Valentine's episode. That is coming for our very special APN members, and you'll be able to find it in bonus material, because we're going to be doing a little quiz for Emma and James now to see how well they really know each other as a couple outside of their archaeological work. So if you want to listen to that as a member, please do go to the Archaeology Podcast Network website and log into your member space, and you will be able to find that there. So enjoy.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.